Welcome back to Voice Global. I'm your host, Pete Erickson. And this is part of our chat series where we're talking to folks from around the world across many different kinds of organizations, major brands, financial institutions, and nonprofit groups that are at the forefront of solving really tough challenges. Our next guest is really on the doorstep of so many of those challenges related to isolation, inclusion, and improving quality of life at the AARP Foundation. We're going to get to know more about that organization in just a second. Please welcome to our stage Paolo Narciso. Paolo is the Vice President of Product and Program Development at the AARP Foundation. Paolo, how are you doing?
I'm great, Pete. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for taking some time to chat with us. I think first off, let's talk, if you could, for our viewers come from around the world, tell us quickly about AARP and then also the foundation and how those two relate to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. AARP is the largest nonprofit organization. It's a membership-driven nonprofit organization in the United States. We have 39 million members as a social impact organization. So our goal is to advance the needs of older adults in the United States. And we're expanding globally, but today, our membership is very much U.S.-based membership.
So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the foundation then and how it relates to that the organization.
Sure. The foundation is AARP's affiliated charity. And while AARP serves all our members, our 39 million members, the foundation does not have a focus specifically on our members. But however, our mission is to be able to specifically support vulnerable older Americans. So we consider vulnerable older Americans those who are low income or are disabled. And the foundation's mission is to be able to solve senior poverty and imagine a world without senior poverty.
That is an excellent mission. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about your role and in that mission.
Yeah, so my role is to create new products and new services for the foundation that serves the needs of the vulnerable older Americans in the United States. We focus across several impact areas. We look at areas of food security and making sure that older Americans have enough food to eat as well as nutritious food to eat. And are never in search of that next meal or have to worry about, do I pay the rent or do I feed myself or pay for my medical bills. We look at housing security, the ability for people to age in place in their homes or in their communities. Obviously, income as we grow older is just as important, and many people aren't retiring. So our focus on income security is to ensure that older Americans are in fact receiving a steady stream of income that exceeds their expenses. And lastly, we focus on issues like social isolation, as you spoke about, which is looking for ways to make sure that seniors are connected and they are supported within our society and have the proper connections to live a rich, purpose-driven life.
Well, let's talk about the role of assistance. I know that we've had AARP on for the last couple of years at our events, speaking at our events, and certainly over the last year. Goes without saying, the last 16, 17 months have been super trying because we've all been isolated from one another. And only now is that starting to lift a little bit as the vaccines make their way. But certainly probably put a really heightened sense of priority on solving isolation. Let's talk a little bit about the role that voice assistants and voice technologies can have as it relates to isolation specifically, and how maybe some of your priorities might have changed in the last year.
So it's a great question, Pete. And unfortunately, the pandemic has put a focus on social isolation. It's for good, both good and bad reasons. And for foundation, it's been just as much as a challenge. But we've tried our best to be able to meet that particular challenge, and the importance of voice technology is challenged. For instance, one of the programs we put together very quickly when the pandemic started was a food assistance program we delivered a little over 3.2 million meals out within the time span of May and July to older Americans who were struggling to be able to have food in the pantry. And we were able to respond very quickly. One of the tools that we use from a technology perspective is, in fact, voice. As many of you may know, we have a platform called Connected Communities, which is built entirely on Alexa and on Google, that allows for seniors to interact with their smart speakers. And through that particular program is where we first identified that folks were in fact struggling with being able to put food in their pantry or access going to the supermarkets, for instance. You recall early in March and in April, a lot of the supermarkets started closing, or the ability to access food was very, very difficult. And voice technology was one of the enabling technologies that allowed us to identify folks that needed assistance, and for us to be able to quickly deliver those meals to the folks that needed it.
Well, certainly necessary. Let's talk a little bit about, adoption. So when you are able to put a voice assistant in with a senior that has, that really has a need to be able to access services or goods or other kinds of support, how is that process going, and how well are seniors able to adopt voice technology today? And then let's talk about, where we'd like to see it go in the future.
So we were honestly very surprised, as many organizations, we have been testing voice and looking for ways to be able to use voice. And that effort has gone on for several years now. We're in the fourth year of implementing voice technologies in our solutions, predominantly for social isolation, to be able to have seniors interact not only with a device like Alexa, but also with each other through voice. Adoption has been surprisingly, so adoption is a double-edged sword, right? Once seniors learn how to be able to use a device like Alexa, or being able to use voice on their phone, we find that becomes their preferred medium of communications and being able to use, interact with technology. We have seniors who the only voice they actually hear is the voice of Alexa and the voice of Google during the day, which is sad. But at the same time, learning to be able to communicate with Alexa or with Google, literally, they if we wanted to take those devices back, we could never get them back. So once they adopt the technology, it becomes very much permanent in their lives for many reasons, right? Text is too small, for instance, to be able to use on their phone. It is effective in many ways, but voice is certainly freeing from a screen perspective. Also, you need the use of your hands, and being able to just use voice to be able to perform tasks or to get updates and so forth has been a need of seniors, and one of the reasons why they adopt voice technology very, very quickly. It's also used from a caregiving perspective to be able to check in on loved ones, and notifications on Google and notifications on Alexa that allow people to check in on their loved ones through voice and to be able to tell their stories. And once they have that freeing medium, not having to worry about a device specifically that they have to look at, we find that seniors, again, very quickly adopt to that technology.
I love to hear that. And I love that they don't want to give it back. Let's talk about the application layer, and how much is AARP Foundation developing kind of on its own from a standpoint of applications, voice-based applications, versus, working with others that are out there, and maybe tasking the market to come up with ideas to help improve social isolation, access to care, all those things.
Yeah, so our strategy is always to first use the market and look for market-ready solutions before building it ourselves internally. And that was the case when we launched Connected Communities, which is a social isolation app. It was the case when we launched a chatbot and incorporating voice in that chatbot. Now we went with organizations in the marketplace, technology companies that were building a solution, already had a particular solution or a particular skill that simply just had to adopt to the senior market. So that is always our first strategy, is to go to the market first and see where we might be able to get assistance. Now, barring that, when we have to build our own, we will build our own when that happens. And we have and continue to look at ways where the market isn't quite fulfilling that particular gap for seniors. Understand also that the people that we serve are the lower income older Americans. So there is no particular revenue model in many cases when we interact with the folks who deploy these particular technologies for those seniors. And so because of that, in some cases where there is no market ready solution, we obviously have to fill that market.
Sure.
But our strategy is always to look for partners to help us out.
So where do you see the biggest opportunity? We got a lot of folks that are watching from around the world, and they're trying to figure out, but where do you see the opportunities for the market to really address this market, a large market? I mean, the senior care market globally is massive. So what do you think? What would you share with the market out there in terms of like what you're seeing on the front lines?
Well, there are lots of use cases for voice, and where I think there is a market. So clearly in the area of social isolation, it is a huge need, as you've seen throughout the pandemic. It was a problem before the pandemic. It was just it's just shone the light on the issue of social isolation because of the pandemic, and people started hearing about that. But the need for mental health and using voice to be able to provide that particular therapy is, I think, a big area that we're continuing to explore, and need to continue to explore that. That kind of takes social isolation a bit further. On the social isolation front, we're always looking for ways to use voice as an on-ramp to get them into the physical world, right? We don't want seniors staying inside their home. In the pandemic, yes, that's where we wanted seniors to be safe. But now, as things loosen up, the ability to use voice to get them to events, to get them to be able to meet with other people face to face is critical. And I think there's a real need to that. Caregiving, as I've spoken about briefly before, is a huge market. Being able to check in on your loved ones using voice, check in to make sure that you're taking the medications, but also just to be able to engage with them and tell stories, and use storytelling is really critical. We see areas in jobs with voice. We're in fact testing many voice applications now to help seniors as they interview and practice their interviewing skills, again, using voice. So we see a lot of opportunities in the workplace, including for the ability to implement more training using voice, getting skills-based training to improve a particular person's job skills, for instance. But then there is a lot of apps as well, or a lot of opportunity as you look at mental health, and as you look at what do we consider to be brain health, helping people stay sharp, right? There are apps and games that can be developed using voice, I think, that the market truly needs. So lots of opportunities for voice, but again, as a general rule, we see voice as a way to be able to more easily navigate and be able to access information and tools that a senior may not be able to access using traditional screens.
Sure.
An example for that, for instance, is access to benefits. Is there a way for us to be able to have seniors apply for Medicare or Medicaid or food assistance through a voice application versus having to go to a website? So lots of opportunities in the use of voice.
Well, I'll tell you what, the breadth of requirements. I mean, you just mentioned insurance and dealing with paperwork, and as somebody who's perfectly able-bodied, we have a hard time going through our insurance papers and documents that we need to go through. It's a maze, and just knowing that there are people working on solutions that allow us to use our voice to help navigate sometimes really tricky services and requirements and healthcare and everything else is just it's so wonderful. What gets you excited about the future? Like, what does this look like in 5 years? If you could say that, if things go really well, for you in terms of like your journey there to AARP Foundation, what does life look like in 5 years for your constituents?
So access to technology is um, how we see success, right? It's not just access to technology for the sake of technology, but there are barriers to folks being able to access jobs, to access benefits, to access income opportunities, and so forth. That I feel that voice will be able to bridge that gap, or be a technology that allows seniors to be able to bridge that gap easily. So for us, we see it from that perspective. The other area that is very important to us is equity, and the issue of making sure that no one is excluded from using some of these advanced technologies. And the future for us looks to see is whether or not we're able to achieve that. I'll give you an example again with the use of voice technology, specifically for older adults and low-income older adults. Many of the folks that we're serving today in nursing homes and in assisted living facilities are becoming much more diverse than what they were before. The turnover in terms of language and diversity is increasing very, very rapidly, where now you will have communities that do not read English, and don't speak English, and frankly don't actually read also in their own language. To be able to allow them to be able to access services just by using voice will be a success, as we measure ourselves against the framework of equity and the ability for technology to be used by everyone, including seniors and disabled folks, in multiple languages would be a huge win.
Well, I think it's a very noble cause, and certainly something that's very needed. And I think, again, this highlights, one of the, I think, unique characteristics of the voice tech industry and the landscape is how many really serious problems that we can solve and that we are solving through voice technology and voice interfaces. And Paolo, you're certainly at the forefront of that, and we appreciate and we applaud the work you're doing at the AARP Foundation. For our viewers, could you share, if people want to know more or get involved, or is there any place they can go just to find out more information about what it is you all are doing, whether they could have an aging parent, or maybe just want to get involved in some way?
Sure. So obviously the AARP Foundation website, which is www.aarpfoundation.org, is a great place to start. But we also have a site specifically focused on connecting seniors together, and that's called connecttoeffect.org. So it's www.connect, CONNECT, the number 2, and then effect.org is a great place to be able to look for resources, specifically for isolated seniors, to be able to, in fact, test for your own social isolation, to try out our voice technology and our chatbots, and some of the new things we're trying to do to be able to help connect people together. And then obviously being able to reach out to us if there's interesting solutions that the world is working on that we would love to learn from, and figure out how we can collaborate together, solve some very important problems.
Absolutely. Connecttoeffect.org is the website. So yes, definitely a great place to go, and the AARPfoundation.org website as well. And thank you, Paolo, for being open to so many of the wonderful providers we have in this industry that are up and coming and solving challenges as well, that they may be able to reach out. Any final thoughts on folks that are maybe watching this interview that they may not, they may be new to the voice tech industry. They may be trying to break in. Maybe they're trying to assess this market as something to go into. Any advice for people that are just coming into the space?
Yeah, they're great. There's a lot of great resources out there. And my advice is to go deep into learning about voice and learning about voice UI. It is entirely different than what we traditionally learned from a UI UX perspective, especially the people we serve. But in my opinion, it's different overall. But to explore the ability to build excellent voice interactions using those particular resources out there, lean on conferences like this, and as well as people who are attending this conference to figure out where they're learning and what they're testing. The last 3 or 4 years has been a lot of testing, and I think the industry is going to mature over the next 4 or 5 years. We're already seeing that. So now's the right time to be able to explore, and I think as we've seen, the ability to use voice makes a big impact on the way our users engage with us.
Well, that's great advice. Really appreciate that, Paolo. It's been my honor to actually get to know you and to get to understand more about the work you're doing at the foundation, the very noble cause of helping to solve social isolation for so many in not only our country but around the world. And I hope that we can visit again at Voice Summit this fall and catch up with you then and find out how things are going. Until then, I really appreciate you taking some time and chatting with us here at Voice Global, and good luck with your efforts there.
It's been my pleasure, Pete. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm Pete Erickson. Our guest has been Paolo Narciso. He is the Vice President of Products and at the intersection of conversational AI for the AARP Foundation. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next chat.